Hello, it's 8, I guess, at least here on the East Coast. So that means that it's time to start. It's really nice to see quite a few familiar faces. We're really happy to be learning with you this Elul. Okay, so this class, as we all know, is Why Are You Sleeping? Piyyutim of Awaking to the Yamim Noraim with Rabbanit Victoria Sutton. And it's nice to see that people know the drill and are accepting my invitation to join as panelists. That way you'll be able to unmute yourself, ask questions, during the pauses. And we get to see your faces if you so choose. Also, if questions come up in the moment, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will also be looking at the Facebook stream once that is all ironed out. Let's see. So throughout the month of Elul, Jewish communities rise early for Selihot, prayers whose words and melodies serve to awaken us to teshuva, and Seliha, repentance and forgiveness. We're going to be studying the texts and themes of several of these piyyutim together, including the opening piyyut, Adam Mah Lekha Nirdam. And just to introduce everyone to Rabbanit Victoria Sutton, she's on the Judaic Studies faculty at the Heschel School and has taught in the Drisha High School program. Prior to that, she served as the Director of Education and Community Engagement at Congregation Beth Israel, a modern Orthodox synagogue in Berkeley. She was ordained through Yeshivat Maharat in 2014, a graduate of Barnard College with a BA in Biological Sciences. She also holds a Grand Diploma in Pastry Arts from the French Culinary Institute. She has also sat on the board of the Jewish Family and Community Services East Bay, and was involved with community organizations in New York City focusing on homelessness, literacy, sexual assault, and domestic violence. So that's a very, wide-ranging resume. With that, I guess I'll let you take that away.
Okay, thank you so much, Maxine. Welcome. I think if you are still in the attendee area, I'm also encouraging you to please join us. A panelist does not mean that you're going to teach the class. There is no pressure. It just means that you will feel, at least to me, and I think the other attendees, and maybe even for yourself, you'll feel a little bit more present in the class. We'll get to see your face if you want. I'll be putting prompts in the chat. I welcome participation. You can, and Maxine, I'm sure will help with this as well, right? If people have things that they want to contribute, right? We want to hear your voices as well. So come join us. So I'm going to share my screen in a second. Hopefully you have the sources. We are 2 weeks away from Rosh Hashanah. We're a little past the middle of the month of Elul. I think we all got a little more reminder of that with the supermoons this month, that we were like even more attuned than we usually were to the cycle. And I don't know about you, but I know I saw that moon. I was like, oh, and then it started to get a little smaller the next day. I was like, oh, it's even closer, right? And I started to feel that feeling. Wow, Rosh Hashanah is really coming, and Yom Kippur soon to follow. And we're going to talk about tonight some of the things that we do as communities and as individuals to prepare ourselves, to wake ourselves up to what's happening in the calendar, and to sort of be in sync with what's going on. And Rosh Hashanah is not something that we usually just show up to, right? Unawares, unprepared, caught off guard. There are many things that communities do. And as I'm going to share my screen, I'm putting in the chat, maybe you can share in the chat something that you do to get yourself ready for Rosh Hashanah. It can be just one simple thing. It could be a word, right? One simple thing that you do to share with everybody. It'd be really wonderful to see what other people do. And with that, don't be shy. Oh, agnon. Anything specific?
The Yamim Noraim.
You're reminding me that I did that last year on Shabbat afternoons. I was finally not working in a shul, and I had like some time Shabbat afternoons, and I pulled agnon off the shelf, and I started to read some of the stories, and I actually ended up sharing with my middle schools one of the amazing stories about Lezer the butcher, which was very much modeled on the Talmud. So sometimes reading other things that get us in the frame of mind. Polish my mother's candlesticks, which are the different rituals. Some of them are about our mind, some of them are very physical. So we're going to think about the spiritual, physical, and metaphysical things that we do. Maxine, perhaps you could spotlight my, yeah, thank you. And then I'm going to share my screen. That way people will have it in front of you. Thank you. Okay. And people can also open this up. There seems to be, I'm going to be sharing some audio later. It seems that when I tried to share my screen with audio, the Zoom audio did not work. So maybe I will just pull it up. In Google Docs. That way it'll be a little bit easier.
I'll see what I can do behind the scenes.
It might just be a new computer. I haven't done that on this computer yet, and so it's a new thing that I'm experiencing. So apologies. I do want to get underway with the learning. I've done many Zoom classes. That hasn't happened before, so always new things, right? Okay, so now I'm gonna try and share my screen again. I will turn off the audio now and then only turn it on. Okay. Okay. Are people seeing the source sheet? Okay, great. So the Rambam in Hilchot Teshuvah, this is a combination of the practices that exist in communities at this time. Some communities blow shofar, some communities say Selihot, and the Rambam sort of mentions both. I don't think, different communities have different customs that they do from the beginning of Elul. He talks about the sound, actually he talks about the sounding of Shofar on Rosh Hashanah, sorry, not on Elul. And he says that on Rosh Hashanah itself, the purpose of it is as if it's to say, even though it has no words, it's pretty, it's just a sound, a pure sound. And it says, Uru Yishanim Mishnatechem, wake up, sleepy heads. V'nirdamim hakitzu mitardamechem, and those who are like in a very deep slumber, wake up from your deep slumber. It's interesting to think about like a light sleep versus a really, like a tardimaz, like you're out, like you're totally out of commission. V'chapsu, and why, what are we waking up in order to do, according to the Rambam? So we can look at the next words, that we're waking up in order to search our ways, right? Waking ourselves up to maybe, we can think about what that means, and people have ideas about what the Rambam means by waking up to search our ways, right? It could be patterns, could be really thinking about the things that we're doing, and to do teshuva, right? And to remember God. Right, waking up maybe out of our normal routine, that we do something different in Elul to get us out of our routine. And then he mentions Elu hashokichim, that it's like really easy to forget the big picture. Right? That it's really easy sometimes to get into our usual way of doing things and really forget about maybe the the big values that we have, right? We just go through the motions, and that maybe the things that we do, we're waking up to think about, like, what are the things that are important to us, and to start reflection, and to think about also, right, are there things that maybe we kind of push to the side, and like this is an opportunity to wake up to those things, right? It could be that it was something we were trying to like put to sleep. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Like maybe we pressed the snooze button on something because we didn't want to think about it, or deal with it or address it. And maybe this is the time to like turn off the snooze button, is what I maybe hear the Rambam saying here. Or maybe it's something that like actually we had no idea. Like we were in a tardema, maybe we had no idea that what we did right was hurtful. Maybe we were sort of like totally out of it. And really looking back and reflecting reminds us of it. So the Rambam is alluding to kind of all of these things. And the third piece he talks about, right, is remembering God, and really thinking about something above us, right? We get so focused on our daily ways, and this is a way to really like remember who we're accountable to, the people in our lives, and to God. And he says, this is later in the paragraph in Hilchot Teshuvah, Mipnei inyan zeh, right? Because the Lechem Mishnah says there, right? Because during this time of year, we look into our actions. We have different practices. People have practices. Yes, of course, we should give tzedakah all year round, but we should always do the right thing all year round. This is like not a 10-day only thing, of course, right? But that people gave more tzedakah. People tried to do more mitzvot, to do more good actions during this time, at least from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, right? And people take on sometimes extra things that they do during that time as well. V'nahagu kulam, right? So I guess in his community where he was, so he left Spain when he was young, right? So this could be where he was later in Egypt, that this is what the community did. He says that it's customary for people to lakum balayla, at least during these 10 days, right? He's not talking about necessarily Elul, but this is a practice that we see has definitely extended. And they come to the Beit Knesset and they share divrei tachanunim until it's light out. Tachanunim are part of our everyday tefillah, right? It's not an only this time of year, but it's something that we do specifically this time of year, that we cry out for help, and we cry out to God. The first piyyut, any thoughts? I just want to hear if maybe in the chat, if anybody wants to share something that, right, what does the Rambam mean by waking up to our action, or waking up to God? So I gave some suggestions. If anyone has anything to share in the chat, don't be shy. We're going to look now at the piyyut Ben Adam, and then we'll get to listen to the piyyut and share some reflections on the piyyut. So the piyyut, we're going to look at some of the background to the piyyut, but we'll just open up. The first line might feel very familiar. It comes from something that we read during this time of year on Yom Kippur from the book of Yonah. So, Ben Adam Mah Lekha Nirdam. I don't think I realized from just reading the book of Yonah how lyrical that line was. It like lends itself very beautifully to poetry and a piyyut, and it's kind of remarkable to think that, right, that the ship captain of the boat in a moment of stress is gonna like speak in this lyrical, very Ben Adam is a very fancy way of speaking, like, oh, you human, right? It's the way that God talks to Yechezkel and others, and speak in this beautiful lyrical rhyme. So there's something very, very poetic already about the captain saying this to Yonah. So here, you can almost read this as, oh, a poet wrote this. right? Without even realizing that it comes from the Torah. But what should you wake up from your sleep and do what? Kum kira b'tachanunim. Call out in tachanunim. And not only that, sefach sicha, you should pour out in conversation to God. Drosh seliha, seek out forgiveness. Me adon ha'adonim, from the master of masters. Rechatz uteher, wash and purify yourself. Right? So that really reminds us of the Kohen Gadol, right? And what he would do, and that we ourselves are modeling throughout this time, not only on Yom Kippur when we read the Avodah, but that all of us, right? And what do we do normally in the morning? It's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, right? Often we wash and we get ready for the day. So we want to face the world as like clean, right? That's a very, right? We do our rechitza in the morning. So just like in our physical waking up, the piyyut is reminding us, right? That when we wake up spiritually during this time of year, that also we're washing ourselves, but it's not like a physical washing, right? We're trying to cleanse ourselves. And there's a real, if you're reading the words, right? We're going to talk about the rhyme scheme a little more, but are people noticing that the phrases are extremely tight, and there's a very, very fast rhyme scheme that gives us a sense of urgency, right? Wake up, do this, wash, hurry up, you don't have a lot of time. If we think back to, like, we're going to look at the captain, think about the ship captain in Yonah, right? That story has a lot of urgency, right? Because they're really in trouble, right? If they don't wake up and figure out how to handle the situation and get out of it, right? They're really, the boat's going to sink. They're going to be in big trouble. And like the piyyut here, not in a danger, right? There's not like that sense of threat, but it's rather like motivating. It's like, get up. Maybe in a way that, right, that an alarm clock, right, sort of like beep, beep, right, it beat, like often, maybe some people might have very slow, soothing alarm clocks. You can raise your hand if you do, but most of the time, things that are pretty fast-paced and upbeat and encouraging help get us up. Yeah, so slumber, yes. So I think this idea of slumber is definitely a sense of avoidance. The Rambam for sure was talking about it, right? People who have forgotten, meaning did they really forget, right? Or they, right, choose to put certain things, we're very good at putting certain things to the side. And this is a time where, like, just like Yonah could really not get away, right? We really can't get away from those things. We can't hide any longer, right? We have to face those and face the day and face who we are. Umehera, and then it finally, after it had this fast pace, hurry, Ruth, Ezra, run to get help. And again, if you're Yonah on the boat, for sure you're running to get help. And it's just really very effective. And we'll hear the different tunes. People might be used to a slower tune, but there are also faster paced tunes. It's really effective in sort of building this momentum of taking that story of Yonah and without a threat, really encouraging us and pushing us. Yes, and it can be quite painful, right? How do we not avoid? Right? How do we like psych ourselves up to face the day and do the things we need to do, right? And the Selihot are very much empowering us to do that. Right, the way that we come together to do it, the way that we sing them together, and the way that the words here are extremely encouraging. And then it says, yes, okay. Right, kind of run away. Our sense is, as Leah put, our sense is that we kind of like want to run away from the stuff the icky stuff, the bad stuff, the stuff that we wish wasn't there. And in the end, as we learn from the story of Yonah, what happens when you try to run away from that? You really, right, you run away and you find yourself again, right? That's really sort of how it works. And so the piyyut, without mentioning the story of Yonah, builds on the fact that we know that story, but doesn't make it about Yonah, right? We're very familiar with some piyyutim that, and we'll look at next week about the Akedah, that are more really exegesis or commentary on a specific story and explore that story. This really takes that as a thread and keeps bringing us back to, oh, we know Yonah. And we're going to see we know Yonah because in many ways we are Yonah, right? And we can identify with Yonah. Ana she'eh shemcha, I'm continuing with the piyyut, Yodei Yisrael Namin, because actually, we didn't forget you, right? The Rambam had said we forgot God. We didn't forget you. We're actually really loyal. We're not trying to run away. Don't worry, right? We actually trust you. And this is, I know there's a lot said now about kind of positive ways of encouragement versus like negative consequences. And I think a lot of the tension around the liturgy of the Noraim is like, how much is it like the carrot and how much is it like the stick, right? How much is it, this will be so freeing and connecting and you will open parts of yourself up and like, don't be afraid, right? And we're going to look at that with the second piyyut of Adon Selihot, right? But there might be piyyutim that also sort of like put a little bit more at the forefront some of the consequences. And it's true that different people might be motivated by different things, but many of the Selihot that we're going to look at really try to be more encouraging. If you put the effort in, if you just, right, turn to God and look inwards and turn to God, it will be okay. Right? Things will be okay. And then it ends with this phrase, Lecha Adonai Hasedaka V'lanu Boshet Hapanim. Because in the end, we know that we're coming before God. This is why it was hard for us to do this in the first place. It's painful, right? Just like when we go to another person and we kind of know that we did, right? It can feel really painful and hard to face up to something that we're not so proud of that thing. And I think here, Boshet HaPanim, there are different ways of looking at it. I think when it's said in this beautiful rhyme scheme, I think it's harder to have it feel like a really, heavy thing, but it's a real thing. Meaning, how much do we focus on the shame and how much do we focus on the turning towards God and justice? And it's really pushing us in that direction. The second phrase, this is gendered, but we're going to look at some sources that crack this open a little bit. And I think we can think about this as, right, human beings in general, right? Amod together, right? Stand up, right? Be like right? Human beings, right? You can be strong, right? You have, I think this is something that was talked about a lot in recent years in terms of speaking with children and teens. This idea of like, you know what, like things might be hard, but like you actually have the power to do things that are really difficult, right? You can dig into that strength, and we're all going to do it together. But nobody can do it for you, I think, is the harder thing here, right? Even though we're all together in the same room, this is not in the collective necessarily. This is addressed to the individual. So we're all together, but we're all individuals. And I can't rely on the person next to me to make the things that I did wrong right, or to connect me to God. And that's one of those really fascinating things about tefillah in general, tefillah in community, but really on Yamim Noraim, that we can be, on the one hand, in a large group of people, and our voices are booming, and the whole room is filled with sound. But also we know that it's on us, right? It's also very solitary, right? A lot of it is happening in here and in here. And this really speaks about both of those. Because why? God, and we'll see this in Adon HaSelichot also, right? God is wondrous, right? Amazing things can happen. Teshuva is possible. Things can change, right? Repentance is possible. And Hamerachem hu yirachem aleinu kerachem ha'av al habanim, right? That God should have compassion on us, just like we would hope a parent would have compassion on us, right? I see this idea of you're a coward if you don't wake up, and I wonder, right, if that, right, how much it's always that tension of, on the one hand, encouraging, on the other hand, like, what does that say about me if I can't face up to myself and what I've done and the person that I am, right? How I got here today. So it's encouraging, but again, it's difficult. It's acknowledging that this is probably one of the hardest things to do, right? Physical feats can be very hard, right? But these spiritual feats can be really, really the hardest things to do. And even if we often think of strength as something like people being physically strong, when we think about God's Gibura, when we think about our Gibura here, we're really thinking about our strength to like admit and return and not be afraid. So we will listen. I'm hoping, I'm going to try it again with the audio. So it could be that when I put on the song with the audio that you're not going to hear me, but I'll put something in the chat. So maybe as we're listening, we're just going to hear a little bit of the song. Think about something you have put on snooze. Okay. And again, this is not like, oh, I was gonna like do my laundry, or like, right, I keep putting that off, or I keep putting off like washing the dishes, right, or like going to the gym. Like that's not the kind of things, right? It's not New Year's resolution snoozes, right? Because those are the things that take up a lot of mental space. But what are the big things that we've put on snooze? And that thinking as we listen to Ben Adam, this is actually the first piyyut. So just to frame it, this goes back to the times of the Geonim, this idea of doing Selihot very late at night or very, very early in the morning. So it's not only, right, in a allegorical sort of way, like wake up because you've been sleeping, right, and walking like in a dream. But actually people are coming 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, on a daily basis to do their Selihot. That practice is mentioned as far back as the Geonim, right? So it's both like the people who have showed up. It's also sort of like, right, you made the effort, right? Now use your time wisely. That you're here. So think about something that you have put on snooze. I am only familiar with it from Sephardi communities, but it could be that other communities have similar piyyutim. If you see on the source sheet, there's also, if you like Sephardi, classic Sephardi, Yehuda HaLevi, but Yehuda HaLevi also wrote a similar poem and a similar Seliha about waking up. So we're going to listen just for a minute or two, and people can quietly think about it and feel comfortable sharing the chat, something that you have put on snooze. So I'm going to share my screen 1 second.
Adam Mah Lekha Nirdam Shefuch Seliha Deru Seliha Me Adonim Rehat Utahar Ve'al Te'ahar שוכן מעונים ומפשע וגם רשע ברח ופחד מהשונאים הנשע שמך יודעס ישראל נאמנים לך אדוני הצדקה
So that was the first phrase. So there's those 2 phrases, and then it goes straight into piyyut, usually of Lecha Adonai Tzedakah, which is a separate piyyut which builds on these ideas. So thank you for all of those who have shared in the chat. We're going to build on this idea of Ben Adam a little bit in some of the textual background. So if you look on your source sheets, you can see I'm going to try that again without the audio, since the Google Docs doesn't have any audio. Okay. That many of us are familiar with the story from Yonah, but I wanted to call to people's attention a really remarkable commentary by the Zohar on the book of Yonah that builds into the themes of the Yamim Noraim. I actually first discovered this when I was at Maharat, and we had to each teach each other something to prepare for the Yamim Noraim, to get us to like prepare shiurim for each other. And I was looking in the Drisha when Drisha was still in a building with a Beit Midrash in New York, and I was in the Drisha Beit Midrash and like looking for inspiration and taking books off the shelf. I'm not going to say I opened up a Zohar because that is definitely beyond my skill level, but what I did open was a commentary on the book of Yonah by the Vilna Gaon called Aderet Eliyahu, and what he does there is builds on this extended commentary of the Zohar. I highly, highly recommend people look at it. It's really very, very creative, and he takes it that much further for the entire book of Yonah. And what does the Zohar say? It's an extended midrash that actually Yonah is all of us. We are all Yonah, and Yonah is all of us. So if we want to look at on the Zohar, that Yonah is an allegory for the neshama, and we actually see this in many, many Talmudic stories. Yonah sometimes represents Knesset Yisrael, the people of Israel. There are many stories of doves showing up in the Talmud in ways that represent God's presence, in ways that represent a person's soul. Right, the Yonah is a symbol of that, of our connection with God, right? The part of us that's connected with God. So Yonah definitely, a Yonah represents this. So the Zohar, I'm not gonna have us read the Aramaic part of the Zohar, has its own Aramaic, and so I'll read the English translation. That Yonah, the text is talking about not just this person named Yonah, but the text is actually talking about the way people are in the world. The way Yonah behaved in the story is sort of a symbol of the way that human beings can be in this world. That Yonah went down to the ship is the soul. That Yonah represents the soul, and the ship represents the body. The soul comes down, and the soul is the part that we talk about so much, right? The piyyut right after this of Lekha Nirdam is the one that has the idea of right, Hanashama Lach, right, V'haguf Pa'alach, that the soul belongs to God, and the body is also God's creation, and that we remind ourselves of that. And so Yonah is an allegory of that. So it comes down in a human body, and once the soul partners with the human body, it becomes much more fallible and less pure. Right? It's subject to, just like the boat tosses and turns, and is subject to sort of the vicissitude, like the waters. Right? It's vulnerable. It's vulnerable. And so that's right. It's not as protected, the person walks in this world as a ship in the great sea about to break up. And it could be that some people feel that vulnerable all the time. I know coming out of COVID and different people, right, depending on people's life situations, sometimes people can really feel like that, right? People can really feel vulnerable in that sense of being on a very rocky, right, rocky terrain. And that's the storm. It also mentions the idea of storm being a consequence, right? So it brings in those ideas as well. And maybe people sort of try to run away. Like maybe we try to steer the ship away from the direction that we should be going, right? Our body leads us, our physical needs are, right? We forget about the soul, And so this is what the Zohar is saying here. And maybe we think that there's no hashgacha, there's no divine supervision in this world. We just, right, we forget about the spiritual sense. And then the person could feel like they're caught in a storm. And it could be that the soul still, just like Yonah, is not really waking up to what's behind everything, waking up to the connection with God. And so the captain who says, Ben Adam Mah Lekha Nirdam, right? Why are you sleeping? Get up, wake up. Can't you see what's going on? The Zohar says that captain is our Yetzer HaTov, the part of us that like encourages us, the part of us that wants to do the right thing, that little voice inside us that encourages us. And so that's the allegory. And it says it's no time to sleep, right? Things are happening. This is how we often come into this time of year, right? The sense of this past year is being right. Our actions this past year are being assessed. The idea of Rosh Hashanah as a Yom Hadin, however people relate to that, and that's not a time to sleep, right? And that it's time to do teshuva. So the Zohar definitely brings in a little bit more of sense of judgment, possibly because the book of Yonah is definitely that the Yonah is that in the book of Yonah, right? It's a huge mistake, right? Trying to run away from one's responsibilities, trying to run away from God, trying to run away from doing the right thing. And even though none of us, right, have that big responsibility, we all have things we need to do. So the soul being deceived by the body is interesting. I think people have ideas to put in the chat. How I've understood it, and I know that the Vilna Gaon develops this in very, very specific detail. I think it's a combination of that our daily lives are not in a place where like the neshama is the main part, right? If we think of like what are we made of? It's our physical lives and our physical ways of being. And that it could be that our inclinations get the best of us. Our character traits get the best of us. It could be that we're tempted by things. Right? And so once we're in the world, we both have the opportunity to make a huge impact and do the right thing, but we also have the opportunity to be fallible, right? Because our Yetzer HaTov might tell us one thing, and then we might just go and do the other thing, right? We might overrule it. And sometimes we might even just, this idea of tardima, right? We might just sort of like try to ignore it or not even consult it and get to that point. So that's talking about sort of like a habit of just going and not really reflecting about what we're doing. So that's how I understood it. The Chida talks about, in many areas, if people are not familiar with the Chida, is Rav Chaim David Azulai, an incredible, prolific writer. If you're not familiar with any of his writings, I don't know how much has been translated. I'm going to try to share it afterwards, in like if I can find things translated. But he lived in 18th century Jerusalem. He comes from a family where he received a lot of Kabbalah and learning. But he was so well spoken and so brilliant that he was sent all across Europe to raise money for the community in Jerusalem. And he still managed to write many, many, many books of not only incorporating the writings of the Ari and Kabbalistic ideas, but they really have beautiful gems in them. So this Pardes HaChida is sort of an anthology of like the garden or the orchard of things that he wrote on Shabbat and on the holidays. And he says here, because again, like waking up to tefillah can feel like thinking about, right? It can be scary. It can be hard. It can make us feel shame. It can make us feel weighed down, right? What if we can't make things better? What if we feel like, right, that's really right? It's hard to do. So he tries to push against the sense of fear that that might exist in thinking of a Yom Hadin, and certain communities have liturgy again that focuses a lot more on the fear and the judgment. And I think he's coming from a very different perspective as a Kabbalist of what this means. And so what he says is, what does it mean to wake up? Right? It's not, and Yonah, right, is wake up, right? This is a different type of awakening, right? When we think of it as an awakening rather than waking up, right, that feels very different. Just that little change in translation of, oh, there's a stirring or an awakening. And that's how the Chida is thinking of this lihitorer, to wake up. And he says that a person must awaken themselves into teshuva from love. Where many are probably familiar with this idea of ani ledodi v'dodi li, this verse from Shir HaShirim, I am to my beloved as my beloved is to me, is an acronym for Elul. But he doesn't leave it at that. He builds on that idea. It's not a very complicated idea, but I think it's a very beautiful and profound idea that he's sharing here. And he says, because God actually really desires and wants us to return. Right? If you think of a parent, if you think of an educator, right? God is all of those things magnified, right, a million times. Like, what do they really want? They want their child, they want their student, right, or their friend, right, in a relationship, to come to reconnect with them. Right? And they'll be accepted. So don't be afraid. Right? You don't have to be afraid. Don't be afraid to reconnect or come back to God and think about the ways in which you were disconnected. Because God really desires this connection in this month, and he learns it from this pasuk. And he says that a person, but God can't do it for us. As much as God wants us to do it, as much as we want that person in our lives, whether it's our child, our parent, our student, right, ourselves, right, to reconnect and make things right in the relationship, like, it needs to be two-sided, and the one who wronged or the one who pulled away is the one that has to approach first. Right? Nobody can do it for them. It's still that sense of, right, like lihit kaber, so it's hard to do, but you're encouraged. And the Chida says, so you have to do it first, and that's what's hinted at of ani ledodi, that kishani mitorer mitchaber im dodi, hakadosh baruch hu. When I, as an individual, if I allow myself to awaken and I don't try to put it on snooze, and I'm not afraid and I don't push it to the side because I'm like, what's going to happen? It's too big. It's too scary. I'm just going to let another year pass, another month pass, another year pass. If I awaken myself and try to reconnect with God, azai bedodi li, then God will certainly come and be in that relationship with me. And then he brings from Yoma, which is very apt for Yom Kippur. 1 second, we're having a little. Okay, more stable now. That it says a person who comes to purify, right? Somebody who comes literally to the Beit HaMikdash, right? In practical sense, right? Somebody who wants to do the right thing. We try to help them along. We don't make obstacles in their way and say, well, what took you so long? And it's not enough, right? So we really try to, once there's an opening, right, and there's different ways of saying this, right, then we help the person. And then he says, yes, of course, this is all the time, right? This is not an only Elul thing, but it does. This is a particular time of year. That there is a sense, and this is an idea that exists in the rabbinic texts and in the Kabbalistic texts as well, that this is a time that is particularly apt for God's rachamim. We're going to think about that idea more next week. What does that mean? Right, is rachamim, right? It's not only confined to this type of year. Teshuva is not only confined, mercy is not. But this is, right, this is a particularly apt time. Yeah. So he's definitely building on here, yes, that awakening means connecting, right? That when we put things on snooze, we sort of disconnect, right? We disconnect from ourselves and we disconnect from others. And that's a very human, I know I have done this, it's a very human tendency, right? When you know you haven't fully been who you should be, either, right, in any context, right, we have a sense of like we want to pull away and we want to kind of avoid. We have a feeling often of avoidance. It can be very common. And this is a way of saying like avoidance is going to only push us further and further and cause more wedges. And that teshuva is first reconnecting. And I think although he's talking about teshuva between us and God, right, we can also think about this between us and other people, right? This should be mirrored in our relationships with others, right? That teshuva, the Talmud, the Mishnah, and the Rambam speaks about this as well, right? That we have to come to the other person and appease them, and hopefully they'll take us back. So other people might not be as welcoming or forgiving as God, as he says here. But this is a very different picture. I think if you ask many people, like what Rosh Hashanah is all about, and Yom Kippur are all about, and this sense of divine judgment and fear and punishment. And that's really not what these piyyutim are trying to encourage in us. Yes, that exists, and we think about that as human beings, right? We think of consequences, right? We're not, but that's not the main focus. That shouldn't be our main motivator, because often that can only weigh us down versus waking us up. And I think that's where I see a lot of these sources talking about of the way of awakening or waking up in a way that motivates us to connect and move forward, and not in a way that weighs us down with fear and regret and paralysis. Right, so the piyyut of Ben Adam really moves us forward. And we're going to look at one more piyyut in our short time together, but that if we think of these piyyutim, right, the rhyme scheme is very quick. There's a lot of call and response. And I always laughed about this as growing up saying Selihot, but they're like really fun to sing. They're very fast paced and everybody's singing it together. And like little children can learn the rhyme scheme because they're very short phrases that rhyme with each other. And they're very easy to remember. And there's something about that. All of those ways that they're constructed, many of these Sephardi Selihot are really like meant to like together lift us up, right? But we want to have a sense of being lifted up and not weighed down. And so hopefully I can have conveyed some of that sense in sharing this with you. But before we get to the piyyut towards the end, I added here this idea, and I mentioned this with the Chida as well, that this is not an only this time of year thing, right? The idea of teshuva, the idea of awakening, right? Hopefully we're self-aware all the time, right? But that's pretty hard to do, right? It's pretty hard to be self-aware all the time, or to wake up every day, right? So we can sometimes, right, motivate ourselves to do this. If you look at the section where it says all year round, right, it says, I'll just pull it up, the Shulchan Aruch. Right, so the Shulchan Aruch takes a different pasuk that has the same idea and opens up all of the laws, his book of the laws, with this same idea that we open Selihot, right? So the way that we open the Selihot is the way that we open every day. It's the way that we open the book of law. And he says, Yitkaber Kari, a person should be strong like a lion, because it's not even the idea of like getting to the point where we can be self-aware, but like we first have to get ourselves there, right? We have to like wake up and like go to Selihot, but we have to actually like, right, get up to face the day, right? So the first step is like, right, I think that's where the Yonah allegory of the soul and the body come in, right? We have to sort of like bring our bodies along, and then, right, right, so he mentions this as an ideal for every single day, but this is an ideal that is really not the way that the Rav Sakar lived his life. I think is a way that most of us are not living our lives. I'm not going to speak for anyone else, right? But he was a Kabbalist. He didn't sleep very much. right? He was very focused, right, on these practices. And it could be that every day he woke up at midnight and did this, right? So for most of us, that's not realistic. So what the Rambam mentions is that for most people, this is something that we try to do 1 month out of the year. For Ashkenazim, it's right, at least a week out of the year. Something that we try to do, right? But just to sense that this is something that maybe people have the temperament to do all the time. And I brought here, I saw this recently from Rabbi Daniel Buskilo, who's a rabbi in LA, who often brings Sephardi sources. And this is from Rav Shalom Mesas, who's from Morocco and ended up being a chief rabbi also in Jerusalem. And he brings this idea that he saw in a book about women in medieval Spain, who used to wake up before their whole house woke up, go and pray, and then go home, wake up their family and do what they needed to do, because that spiritual side of themselves is so important. And I'm bringing this because we get very fixated on this time of year, and it helps us expand our purview of like what we're trying to do. Right? And it might not be realistic, right, to do even Selihot, right, might not be realistic for everybody. But how do we take that sense of awakening and strengthening ourselves this time of year? And the Shulchan Aruch and Rav Mesas are mentioning ways that people try to do that on a regular basis. And that might look different for all of us, right? They do talk about the coffee, actually. The phrase right before this, only because you mentioned this, is that there are two different women that are mentioned. There's the one type of women that wake up really early, make the coffee, and then wake up their husbands, and then the husbands go to shul. And then there's the other set of women who they themselves wake up super, super early, go to shul, and then come home and wake everybody up. And unfortunately, like 1,000 years later, we see many articles about to be productive, waking up at 5 a.m, so you can write that article after, right? So this is very relevant, even though it feels not so, right? And it's those kinds of practices, right? So how do we take this time of year and make it something that feels like we can incorporate it in our everyday lives? And it's not going to necessarily be, it's not going to be the same intensity. Right? We're not the Shulchan Aruch. I'm not these women in Spain. Maybe some of you are, which would be fantastic. But how to make it realistic. I brought here, people might be familiar with Rabbi Alan Liu, This Is Real, and you are totally unprepared. He specifically here talking about Elul and the Ashkenazi practice of blowing the shofar, but I think what he says can either be related to, right, and especially those who are familiar with that practice. Right? The ram's horn will sound on Rosh Hashanah, and it wakes us up, right? It calls you to wakefulness. So he's taking the Rambam's idea, and he says, at first when you awake, you're sort of like, right? It's literally when you wake up in the morning and your alarm goes, maybe some people jump right up, but most people are like, right? Like, oh my gosh, now what? Right? Once you start realizing and becoming more self-aware, it can be very overwhelming. Who are you? Where are you? Then you remember, right? Rosh Hashanah is coming. And that this encounter will carry you closer, significantly closer to the truth of your life. You can see a great deal more than you ordinarily might because you're shining that bright light. But only to the degree that you are already awake. Only in proportion to the time and energy you have devoted to preparing for this encounter. Meaning showing up to Rosh Hashanah, right, is something that the experience will be proportional. And he brings some of the sources that we mentioned, and he says the horn blows to usher us into Elul, and it's blown every morning of Elul, lest we forget, slip back, and surrender to the entropic pull of mindlessness. I think, if anything, I think that is one of the best ways of saying what the rabbis were trying to do during this period of time, right? Is take us off autopilot and saying, wake up, and that the Torah readings help us do that as well. In this sense of waking us up and not weighing us down, and building on the idea of Ben Adam, of what the Chida says, many of the Selihot that are built on the foundation that the Selihot are built on are the 13 attributes of God. And I brought here a picture. This is a Kabbalistic representation that's actually taken from a Tashlich book. This is the verse from Micha that we get the Tashlich practice, which is pretty late from, but that there are two versions of the 13 attributes of faith, of mercy of God. And that really, that's what we're relying on here, right? That ultimately, right, we're relying on God's mercy. And also we're trying to model that in ourselves. When we think about God being merciful, God being forgiving, God being gracious, those are things that we're also trying to encourage in ourselves. And so I brought the acrostic here. And Adon HaSelichot is also, it's interesting, we don't know the authors of Ben Adam. We don't know the author of Adon HaSelichot. These have been around for hundreds of years. So unclear, right? I think the authorship is unknown, right? But they exist in many, many communities for many centuries. And if you notice, this is a version translated by Rabbi David de Sola Pool, who's from the Sephardic, from the Spanish Portuguese community, and he put the acrostic here in a way that he also, the translation is an A to, right, is ABC acrostic. Acrostics are very, very popular in Piyyutim, either the acrostic of the author, acrostics like Ashrei from Psalms, because it helps you remember. Right? This is something that you want to be able to say and remember the next line, and you want to remember. Right, so Adon HaSelichot reminds us that we're really, that God is the master of forgiveness, right? And we ask God, we admit our mistakes and ask God to forgive us. And that's really what we're doing during the Selihot. So even if it might be hard to awaken ourselves and be reflective, that the Selihot remind us, if that we're able to take that really, really hard step, that we will be forgiven. And it could be in our relationship with God, and if we take that hard step with other people, we will be forgiven as well. People probably have heard this in, I'm going to just play, and maybe you can think about the qualities. People can look at the acrostic and think about the qualities listed here. And some of them are, yes, they're talking about God, but maybe qualities that we want to embody, right? It's not only God that searches the depths of our souls, but we want to be people that have the ability to look inward and search the depths of our souls. We want to be people who are forgiving. So I'm going to play one more version of Adon Selihot, and people can think about perhaps one aspect here that either they are looking towards, that they hope to feel in their relationship with God. Which aspect, right? Which aspect of this, right? And coming towards Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and perhaps sensing that fear of like impending, we sometimes get a little anxious, right? About what does this mean, and having that time to reflect, and actually what are we looking forward to in that relationship with God, and what are the qualities of God that we're relying on to help us through this period of time. So the acrostic is on the screen. I'm gonna share it. Okay, I'm gonna share. 1 second. Okay, the audio.
رحوم وحنون حطنوا لفنخ رحم علينا أدون السليحات بوحن لبابوت قول عموكوت دوبر صداكوت حطنوا لفنخ رحم علينا الرحم شمخ الحنون شمخ ربعوني عمخ رحم على
So I think people could hear, there are different versions of this. This is the one that I'm most familiar with, which is like very, very upbeat, right? And really like looking to God, not in a scary way, right? But looking to God in a really, right? Like, we're all in this together. We know that you want us to like succeed and do well. And that's what we're here to do. So if we wake up and show up, we know that you want the best from us. And we know you want us to do well in this world. And that's really what the Selihot are trying to encourage us to do in their very beautiful poetic, way. There are some other links if people are interested. The ones from the National Library of Israel on the source sheets have actually recordings from dozens and dozens of communities. So you can really listen to the way that different communities express themselves musically with the same piyyutim. It also just shows how widespread these piyyutim are, this practice, how meaningful they are in people's preparation. And that it would not feel like the Yamim, Noraim, and Elul without singing these. Piyyutim. So hopefully both the music and the learning have helped us feel a little bit a sense of awakening, help us to wake up a little bit to the things that we want out of these coming weeks as we head towards Rosh Hashanah, help us think about the things that we want in the coming year, the relationship that we want to have with God, and maybe help take away some of the anxiety, some of the fear, some of the heaviness and the weightiness of the feeling of high holidays. That there's a lot of, yes, they're serious, but they're also very uplifting and very beautiful and very connective. And that's really what the Selihot are trying to get out of this time of year. So I know that there were some technical issues. Thank you for bearing with those technical issues. Thank you, Maxine, for your for moderating. I know maybe I'll leave Maxine for the announcement, but I'll just say we're going to have one more session. I know it's the night before Erev Rosh Hashanah next Thursday, but it's about piyyutim of Rosh Hashanah. So I will be the one teaching. You will be the ones present. So you can do your cooking or you can do your whatever it is you're doing. If you're traveling somewhere, you're in the airport, whatever it is, we'd love to have you tune in. We're going to look at two piyyutim, which are two of my favorite piyyutim of Rosh Hashanah. One is Et Sha'arei Ratzon, an extended, beautiful midrash on the Akedah story that precedes the shofar blowing and is also sung on Yom Kippur. That's like the hallmark piyyut in many communities, and also a few called Chantachon, which about God's graciousness. And so hopefully you can join us next week, and I'll turn it back over to Maxine.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbanit, and thank you to everyone here for being part of our learning community. So our Elul classes are continuing, as Rabbanit Sutton mentioned, we're on again next week, but they also continue sooner than that. This Sunday, we have the Stanley Rudolph High Holidays Memorial Lecture. Rabbi Danny Siegel will be teaching on the topic of Awaken the Morn, how to invite the new year, and that's at 11 a.m. Eastern. We also have more classes scheduled for the Elul, and you can register at the link that I've just put in the chat. That's 5783.drisha.org/Elul. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week and perhaps sooner. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Shabbat shalom.